And I think we are set up. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Alma Urbano. I'm the new grants manager for Chinook Fund. So I'll be doing this workshop for the first time as well. And like we saw, we have interpretation available. And then we also are recording the workshop so we can put it on our website in case people missed it or just for general information. And let me move. Is everyone able to see my screen? First thing. I see thumbs up, so we can get started. Like I said, I'm Urbano Grants Manager. We also have Trina Moya. I don't know if Trina can wave. But
Hello.
and as our Finance and Operation Manager, so she's going to be available to answer some financial questions. And then someone very essential to making this happen, Hannah Rose Baker, who will be doing a lot of admin assistance today. Um, And just to get started, especially since everyone who used my link has my name, if you could just type into the chat your name and pronounce, and if you want your organization, just so we know who is in the room with us. And you can do that as I go through the next slide. Okay, so today we will be going over our grant application process for the fall 2024 grant cycle. And so we'll be doing we did introductions, or we're doing that, and then we'll do history of Chinook Fund, probably very brief, and then go into the giving project and how it affects, and it's essential to the grant making process, the grant making criteria, what we do and do not fund. We'll focus a lot on community organizing because that's a big priority of Chinook Fund. And then just go into the application portal and logistics like financials. And then we'll wrap up with contact information. Mhm. So if you've been around Denver, you are probably familiar with Chinook Fund to some extent. We've been around for over 34 years. And it started as a part of a national movement around, I think it was called the Funding Exchange. And it was around making grant making more accessible to community leaders and people who wanted to move wealth away from big corporate or big organizations at the national level, moving it more into the hands of community members. And it was especially important during the 70s when there was a lot of backlash to the civil rights movement in the 60s. So that's kind of the general history of Chinook. The funding exchange is no longer active, but the Giving Project Network is, and we'll learn more about that in a bit. Um, just our mission. This was just updated on the website yesterday. So this is a new mission to many of us, and that is Chinook Fund seeds community-led systemic change by mobilizing resources for and trusting in grassroots social justice organizations across Colorado. So our strategic plan is on our website available if you want to look at that. It has some of the new focus and highlights a lot of the priorities you'll see here for 5 years out. And let's see. And then we have the Giving Project. So the way Chinook Fund works is by mobilizing resources and kind of moving them into community hands through the Giving Project. So this is a group of volunteers, usually around 15 people, 15 to 25, depending on the season. We have two cycles, one in the spring and one in the fall. And this cohort of people goes through a very extensive 6-month process of 3 phases. So they go through political education about the criteria that we'll go over and learning about philanthropy and how we try to do things different at Chinook. And then they also fundraise. So the money available for the grants is actually dependent on the group of volunteers in the Giving Project. And they are also the main ones who make the bigger decision at the end of deciding who gets the funding. Mhm. And also, if you have questions that are very specific in general to the slide, you're welcome to put them in. We might move them to the end if they're very general questions, and we'll have time at the end for more answers. So to get started, the guidelines. So we differentiate guidelines and criteria from priorities. So to get started, the criteria, it's very based on essentially requirements. So these are things that we the kind of rules for the giving project to look at and evaluate. So this is where all the evaluation process goes through specifically. Mhm. To get started, at the very least, organizations have to be Colorado or be operating in Colorado or have regional or be an regional indigenous group. So the regional indigenous group has to overlap into Colorado region for them to also qualify. And you have to be an organization that has an annual budget of 350K or less. So that's part of the eligibility quiz, which we will go over, but those are the essential minimum requirements to qualify. And then some of the things we do not fund, we do want to be explicit at the beginning. We don't fund just direct services to individuals. We also do not fund groups that have budgets over 350K. We also do not fund just individuals or organizations controlled by one individual. We also don't do scholarships, or we don't fund profit-making organizations or businesses. There is an exemption for worker-owned cooperatives. So you just need to make that clear in the application or check in with us before you submit the application, because it will give us a warning that you're not a nonprofit when you apply. We also don't fund other foundations or do pass-through funding. So mutual aid actually falls under pass-through funding. So we do fund organizations that do mutual aid in their communities, but they don't, the funding they receive from us is not used to give to other individuals for mutual aid. So it's used to fund, still has to be a charitable effort to be able to receive funding from us. And then we don't fund organizations whose work, our decision-making body is outside of Colorado. So they have to be in Colorado. And then we don't try to influence the election. So we don't fund anything related to that or support individuals getting into public office. Any questions so far? Okay.
You will,
So,
you will fund an organization that has a fiscal sponsor.
right. Yes. So we'll go more into depth later on, but yes, as long as you have a fiscal sponsor, you're still like a nonprofit and able to apply. As long as you meet the other requirements. One second. Okay, so the main criteria that the Giving Project spends a lot of time looking at is these things. So constituent-led, community-wide, and lasting effect. These are the main things that go through rubrics. And we do want people to spend time understanding that. So we will go through examples here as well. But to get started, we want projects that are constituent-led and are able to demonstrate that. So this is work that is led by the people most impacted by the injustice you're addressing. We believe that those most impacted by the justice have the vision and solution for their own liberation. The questions in the application that we'll get to that are who is the most impacted by the injustice you are fighting, and how are those most impacted actively providing leadership and direction for your work? How do you identify and develop new leaders? And then, for instance, in the example of youth organizing, how is youth voice being incorporated into leadership? Is there an advisory board or some other form of decision-making body related to that? And the slides in Spanish are a little more spread out sometimes because of the amount of writing. But hopefully you're all able to view it on your email before or after during the meeting. The second main guideline is community-wide. So this is more particular about addressing the intersections and the different types of oppression and who is at the table. We definitely want projects that reflect as much of the constituency represented in their community, but specifically those who would not otherwise be included in conversations of decision making. So people with less privilege, facing more types of oppression, or more layer experiences. Mhm. So the questions in the application that are going to get at that is, how does your organization define diversity? And how do you ensure everyone is represented, especially those with less privilege? Um, and there will be a diversity chart. So you can describe any activities or educations or actions your organization has taken in this area. And if you feel comfortable sharing your progress or setbacks and the learnings from those as well. Here's in Spanish. We'll leave it 1 second. And then lasting effect. Oh. So this is work that makes meaningful change for the community, and you're able to demonstrate how it impacts the community as a whole or just future generations as well. So it's not addressing one issue or one particular immediate need. Um, it usually it affects at least the next generation in your community. So these are the questions. What systems or institutions will you work to change in order to fight the injustices? And then what actions are you doing? And how will your community or society be different because of your work? Mhm. So, in summary, all successful applicants must be based in communities facing injustice. They have some sort of democratic leadership or decision-making body that is led by people most impacted by the issue, and there's ways to keep them accountable as well. And then you're engaging in active privilege and in dismantling privilege and oppression within organizations or community. And you're able to demonstrate that your work can lead to permanent progressive change in your community. So then we have priorities, and this is different than the guidelines or criteria in that these are not required. Um, we will fund organizations that may not meet all of these priorities, but when there is a urgency or there are lack of funds available, we will prioritize these priorities. So these are just priorities guide the allocation of resources and focus attention on specific goals or issues. These are urgent and very important to Chinook Fund, but they are not a requirement. Okay. So we like to fund, or we prioritize funding rural organizations. And this is mainly because we are Colorado wide, and organizations in urban settings and cities usually have more resources and access to funding from bigger foundations just because of the proximity to that wealth. And rural organizations usually face challenges when applying. So anything from electric outages to other weather conditions, just access to resources is more difficult in those areas. Mm. And then we try to prioritize Black-led organizations and Native-led organizations. And has just been redefined in the strategic planning for Chinook Fund. But essentially, we prioritize these groups because we understand that a lot of the wealth in philanthropy and just in general in the country comes because of stolen land and stolen labor specifically, and in trying to redistribute those funds. It is getting to address the communities that need it most or whose work and land has contributed to the wealth to begin with. And I'll go more in depth into that in a bit. And then we prioritize community organizing efforts. Again, these are not requirements, but these are really strong applications or applicants in our pool. And we define rural organizations. as groups that are based outside of the Front Range. So not in Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs, or Fort Collins. And then community organizing, we'll go over this more, but essentially the process of bringing affected people together to use their collective power to win improvements for their community and change the power structure to advance social justice. So this is a little bit more about what we mean or what we try to do in the long term. We use Black led as a priority, but it is within a bigger framework of Black liberation. And we understand that there's more to Black liberation than just being a Black led organization, for instance. But there are other efforts that these groups usually try to address. So things like economic justice or political power in general. But our anti-oppression frameworks in the Giving Project model position Black liberation, indigenous sovereignty as a national priority. And this is not the only type of work Chinook Fund will fund, but these are communities and voices that we want to center in our work internally and externally. And then also indigenous sovereignty. Uh, at the top level, native-led efforts, but those could also mean protecting tribal nature resources, promoting Native American human rights, holding government accountable to Native laws, and just preserving tribal existence and increasing laws and issues or addressing laws and issues affecting Indian rights. Okay, so community organizing. This is a picture from Resident Leadership Council in Aurora, Colorado. And this is a good example of neighbor-led type of work. But we define successful community organizing as work that has a grassroots base of support. So you'll hear community-wide, constituent-led are very important because community organizing work itself usually requires a base of a form of community to follow their actions or their strategic direction. So they drive the plan of how to address an issue together by clear demands for policy and system change. And usually they have a power making or a power map where they identify who needs to be or who do they need to talk to or which people hold power within their communities to address other issues. So this could be officials in the government all the way to businesses or corporations, managers. And then they usually have a leadership ladder. So it's not about there's leaders and then they're the only ones who lead the group. It's about those leaders creating more leaders in their community as well. And we got this from the Grantwell Fund. And something we definitely want to clarify is that we define community organizing as different from these other types of very important work, but things that are not a priority for Chinook Fund, like direct services, education, advocacy, and empowerment. So we do not prioritize services, and those mean supplying basic needs to people who need them to survive. So this could be anything such as supplying food, healthcare, shelter, and transportation. And we're not saying that this is not important work. It's just not a priority for Chinook Fund because there are many large philanthropy efforts that only address services. And there's not a lot of efforts or foundations that only fund or only try to fund community organizing work. So for instance, if we get an application from this group, let's see, the Health Alternative is a community-based health center offering birth control, free pregnancy tests, and abortions. They provide financial support to those unable to pay for services and for out-of-town clients needing travel or accommodation assistance. So this would not be a priority in our application pool because it only addresses services. There's no a clear constituency-led effort, or it might not be as community-wide. Or that may be the strongest point, actually, would be community-wide if they try to reach as many people as possible, but it wouldn't be community organizing in how we defined it. So it would not be a priority. And then we have education advocacy. So trying to raise visibility of a cause and advocating for and or against policies on behalf of another group affected by the problem to lawmakers, decision makers, media, and other stakeholders. This would also not be a priority on our docket on its own, because it's work that doesn't explain who the constituency are or how you're creating more leaders. And it's different from how we define community organizing. So an example of this would be a state affiliate of a national organization dedicated to accessible abortion. This is amazing work and work we would individually might support, but not as an organization because of the lack of community members with intersecting identities being part of this effort. Or because they're not part of this effort, then this wouldn't be a priority for us. Also, empowerment. So empowerment on its own, um, as described here, providing programs that focus on supporting positive identity development or self-esteem within any group, but even among marginalized groups is not necessarily a strong application on its own. So this example would be a program where high school students are paired with program graduates as mentors, and they run an after-school program for community service projects with the goal of empowering youth to make informed decisions. Again, this is really great, important work, and we're just not able to fund as much of this because of our limited resources and because looking at the criteria or the requirements around community-led projects or not being able to demonstrate that there's youth leadership in the project and things like that. So this wouldn't be as strong of an application if they only focus on this. And then our definition again for community organizing, the process of bringing affected people together to use their collective power to win improvements in their community and change the power structure to advance social justice. So this is an example of a stronger application. Let me move this. And this would be Powerful Families, an imaginary organization. It's a women of color-led organization committed to reproductive justice in Colorado. And through grassroots community organizing, they amplify the voices of those often unheard, particularly focusing on issues like rural access to abortion and contraception. And they've done listening sessions with their neighbors to compile a comprehensive community report reflecting the real needs and aspirations of our community. And now they work in partnership with bigger organizations to mobilize and lobby for equitable abortion access for all, including undocumented immigrants and recent law permanent residents who may not be eligible for Medicaid. So this would be an example of a stronger application based on priorities. Oh, once again. So another example or another type of community organizing that may not be a traditional form of community organizing is cultural organizing. So this has some of the same general definitions as community organizing in that it has a base moving to strategize around a goal. But cultural organizing focuses on cultural identity more specifically, or a particular worldview or place. So, for example, we would, to an extent, define this organization, Denver Black Queer Collective, as a group that does more cultural organizing specifically in traditional community organizing because they organize as a base or as a collective, around a particular identity that is usually not represented in spaces of power. Um, so there's more celebration of that cultural identity, but there's still some activism or some transformation of society through that process, and they're able to communicate that. Another example of community organizing that is not traditional would be healing justice. And that would be how oppressed communities holistically respond to and intervene on generational trauma and violence, and how they innovate collective practices that can impact and transform the consequences of oppression on their bodies, hearts, and minds. So this particular group, they also organize within a community and a worldview. So they hold a lot of that cultural organizing, but they do it for the effort of healing their community members and entire families. So they address and change their community in a different way that may not be addressing policy specifically, but it's still not a traditionally funded effort to change communities. There are other points that our strongest applications demonstrate. They usually work with a long-term vision that is clearly linked to current milestones. They have achieved successes that have positively impacted community, or they have a plan if they're new organizations on how they will try to achieve those successes for their community. They see themselves as part of a larger movement of social justice, and they offer alternatives to existing institutions and systems that perpetuate injustice. And they take risks. So a lot of the work, especially in the past and currently, that Chinook Fund has funded is work that is not traditionally funded by bigger philanthropic organizations. Things like back in the 80s around funding undocumented immigrants' rights efforts were not as common at that point, but they influence later on for those groups to receive more funding from bigger groups. So Chinook Fund was part of moving those funds. And there's other examples. Mhm. If you are curious about other grantees, please check out our website. I wasn't sure how much time we were going to have. But we have a very extensive website thanks to our communications manager. So you can check out the previous work we've funded. And we fund different types of work. So it doesn't have to be specifically around the priorities. There's other types of efforts that we have contributed to in the past. Wait, any questions about the main criteria and requirements so far? I'm able to see
I'm
the
a,
chat.
this is Nicholas Walker. I appreciate your presentation. Uh, I wanted to ask because I'm kind of at a in-between point with our organization. We're a community development corp, and that's almost exactly what you guys are doing. Uh, and your point about constituent-led, we're at the point where we've got the 501(c)(3), but we don't have the neighborhood organizations and formal board of directors. We have an organizational board, but not a formal board. And so I'm kind of in between where you say constituent led. Can somebody help me with that?
Yeah, so you mean that because you don't have a established board that you might not be a constituent led, or because you have a community or a neighborhood board that it is already constituent led?
Well, see, we started the research and development part uh, in 2019. And that was all constituent led because it was led by people in the community about financial services. So we got that far, but as soon as we got the 501(c)(3), now it's time for a formal.
Mm.
You see what I'm saying? So I'm kind of in the middle, and I'm wondering how that's going to fly.
Yeah, and I think that is always a challenge with any board, especially because many boards of a nonprofit are in charge of fundraising and moving wealth into the organization. Um, so I think it depends on how you communicate that there's still constituency leadership that may not be the board or that happens in addition to the board doing the other nonprofit duties. Like when we mention youth, for instance, youth under 18 are usually not allowed, or they may not be legally responsible according to the government to be in a board of a nonprofit. So an organization that does youth organizing leadership work, they may not have as many youth in their board or leading body of the organization, but they are able to demonstrate how they are still part of decision making in some other way. So that's kind of how we've seen in applications, and that is a question we will ask if we see that the board may not be representative of the most marginalized community members impacted by the work. There's still other ways you can, as long as there's other ways or other bodies of decision making um, present. And I'll talk more about project, we general operatings versus specific projects. So some organizations would pick to be funded as a specific project because their organization may not be fully constituent led, but specific efforts are constituent led. So they just make the promise that they will use the funding for that specific body of or group of people. We have time for another question right now, and then we'll have more time at the end. Is there another question so far?
Hi, I'm Lupe Amate. I have another question. So my organization does some work around healing justice and food justice, but um, a lot of that work is also providing direct services like access to food, but is through like restoring traditional ecological knowledge, which we define as like indigenous based systems of understanding agriculture. And then we also have like a healing justice initiative that reclaims indigenous forms of midwifery. So I'm wondering like if we would not be like if we would be considered cultural or healing justice in organizing, or if like we're not in the community organizing scope because we're doing empowerment and education and direct services in a way, but we're also advocating for like more land access and autonomy with our local governments too. So I'm just wondering where we fall on that spectrum in your perspective.
I think it would depend. We would have to see the whole application to be able to define it. Um, but it depends also how you narrate that to us in the application. So if you decide that based on this presentation, that culture organizing is the best way to describe your work, then as long as you're able to make that connection to the other type of services or other community work you do, then that's how the Giving Project will evaluate it. Or we'll take that into consideration as they do the evaluations. As, yeah, I can't say like I would define it in a specific way, but I could see how you could define it in any of those, like you mentioned, like healing justice as well.
Thank you.
And we can keep going. I'll try to be slower. Um, so the timeline. The priority deadline is going to be September 12th. So please do go into the portal and try to fill out just to see if there's anything, hiccups or anything that come up on the website before this day. But we are also clearing at least my schedule to support more the week leading up to the grants. But we would appreciate if you bring us anything, if you're not able to log in or anything like that, or not able to see the application, to please let us know soon. Um, and that is around the time the Giving Project will also start reviewing. So we go through an internal review just to see if the application is complete, looking at the financials and all the other logistics. And then we pass it directly to, after staff and board reviews it, we go to the Giving Project. And then they begin the review process. They specifically start the screening meetings in December, so more intentional decision making. And then that's when virtual site visits are begin to happen. And those happen for around 2 months. Um, and we will send notification. And that's also sometimes when we send notification if we need additional documents. But for this round, we try to get those before the screening happens in December. And then we'll do site visits. Site visits are virtual for this round, and they have been since 2020 to make them more accessible. So you'll receive an email directly from the Giving Project members themselves if you're selected for a site visit. And then final decisions happen in February. Oh. And that's when you'll get final notification. Okay. So to the website, if you go to our chinookfund.org site, and there will be a grants section, but you can use this link for grant application. You'll be taken to our website, and then that will send you a link to the actual portal. And this is the grants, we call it GLM. And that's where you will apply. If you are a new applicant, you'll have to set up a new account. So you have to create a new account. And then if you're a returning applicant or someone in your organization has applied in the past, please let us know so we don't create duplicate organizations. Just to keep it we like to keep the history of our organizations in one place, and also make sure you have access to everything that the organization has submitted to if you need to have access to it. So please let us know if you're not sure if you have an account already. And then for Spanish language, you are able to select it in this select language with the first yellow arrow, but you have to zoom out. So it's a little more challenging than we thought it would be. So just let us know if you need support and we can help you get to that point. So the application questions are in Spanish if needed. That's what it says. So first, when you're creating a new account, so this may not apply if you already have an account with us, but when you're creating your account, it's going to ask you about the organization information immediately. So you'll be able to input that information. That's where it'll ask you for, I forget what the number, your 501c3 identification number. And you're gonna, if you have a fiscal sponsor, you're gonna use their number. If you have your own organization, you use your number. And then if you don't have, you just leave that blank or put 0 zeros, and then let us know if you're applying as a worker cooperative. You also fill out your password and all your individual organization and job title. And then you click create account. Oh. Make sure you save that information. But if you ever need to, if you lose your username or password, also let us know and we can help you. Usually your username is your email address though. Um, so if you have applied in the past, you will remember an eligibility quiz. This is the first thing you see when you log in and are set up on the system. You don't see the application immediately. You usually see the eligibility quiz, and that's just to confirm that you're based in Colorado or a regional indigenous group, and that your budget is 350K or less. If you do not pass the quiz, then that just means the way you filled out the eligibility quiz is didn't get approved, so you won't even see the application for fall 2024. But if you did pass it, then you'll move on to the application. So this is how the questions look. An example. And then once you pass, you go to the fall 2024 application and you just select apply. This is the application from a general sense. So each of these sections will have many questions under them. So general inquiries, funding questions, and you're able to see it like this when you click on each area, or it will just show the questions when you log in. Asterisk by a question means that it's going to be a required question. And you can view, so if you are logging into an account from your organization, you will be able to see all the past requests, grant reports from the past, or times when you applied in the past as well, as long as your account is connected to the organization. And then you can auto save. I do recommend you save before you leave. It sometimes auto saves on its own, but it's just best for you to make sure that your work is there when you come back. And you also see the status of your application, though we will contact you through the process as well. And so these are the questions in Spanish. Oh. Hannah Rose, do you have a?
Someone asked me about the Resident Leadership Council, and I don't think I responded to the correct person because of several of the names are under Alma because of the link. So I do not know who asked that question. I apologize.
Do you want to share the question and answer to the group, or?
The question was contact for Aurora Leadership Group. So I think this person was asking for if we have a contact,
Oh.
which I don't know if we could share here, but
if we are able to share it, it is under our grantee list in the website. So you can go to that area and scroll down to find them. And if they let us share their information, you might at least see a website and that will have more contact information.
I'll put that webpage link into the chat. Thank you.
Thank you. I see a hand up. Sam?
Yes. When y'all do, I know you said that the first application, when you are submitted, like within the timeline, that it first, the board and staff are the ones who look over everything. Is it at that time when you kind of look through it and filter who doesn't meet the criteria for it that you take them, like, is that the first filtering and then only the ones that meet it are sent then to the cohort to review? Or does my question make sense? Maybe not.
Yeah. So what happens during the first review?
Yes.
Yeah, so we screen. We just want to have everyone, at least not everyone. It's not the entire board who gets it. It's just their designated people who just keep an eye on it and then the program team. So that includes me and then the other people, the program director and program manager. And that is mostly focused on making sure the application is complete.
Okay.
And there's nothing, so they're charity status or they're worker on comp.
Okay.
There's nothing big in terms of that might come back, like the board does check if there's any other conflict of interest within the board themselves too.
Okay.
Because we do want references, for instance, that are not people within the leadership of Chinook
Yeah.
Fund.
Okay.
So there's other things they check for, but it's mostly to keep everyone on the same page and making sure the application is complete and it doesn't completely go against Chinook Fund's general
Okay.
values. But
Thank
we
you.
do try to review for other things. But the final decision making is going to be in the giving project. But there is some filtering, like I said, if the application is incomplete or something comes up later on, we just want to be prepared for it.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Alma, this is Trina. Do you want to go back just one screen? Because I think a lot of people like to use the question. Well, maybe it's two screens. There, the question list. I don't think you pointed that out. I know some people like to be able to print out the questions and work offline. I think, is that what that's for?
Not this one, but this. Oh, I don't know where it went.
Go forward. There. See, there's a little arrow. Oop, nope, back one.
1 second.
No, there, stop, wait.
Okay. This
There.
one? Okay.
Yes. Okay. See where the arrow is pointing to question list. I just think that's helpful for some people. So I just wanted to make sure that it got explained.
Yes. So you are able to print both as you fill it out, before you fill it out, and after you fill it out to keep in your records. Yeah. So if you want to print all the questions ahead of time and just keep in or use for another like Word or Google Docs on your own, then you can come back and type the questions in as well. Okay, let me go back. But let us know. You can email grants@chinookfund.org and we will try to be as responsive as possible, especially during this month. If you run into any issues or if you want more accommodations for the grant. You will be logged out after 90 minutes of inactivity. So please save your work. So we're going to do a general application overview. There's the general inquiries are looking at the mission statement and other details of your organization, like location, 501(c)(3) status, leadership, like overview. The funding questions are going to be which grant category, and I'm going to go over those later on. Where will funds be spent, budget, etc. And then the proposal narrative has more in-depth questions around the criteria in the priority areas. You will also be asked to share 3 to 5 milestones with specific strategies. Try to focus these on the next year or so, where the money that you're receiving is actually going to be used for. We have received in the past, people send us their entire work plan because we required it, but we won't require a work plan on this round. So the milestones is we were going to see, and we hope to see specific strategies you use to achieve your general mission or your general goal. And then we will ask for financial information, which we'll go over in a second. leadership information, so a brief bio of people in your board and other decision-making bodies, and then we just look for matching. This is something we go on the pre-screening. We're just matching the consistency information as well. If there's significant missing materials, we will reach out before we move forward. If there are materials that we can collect as Giving Project does their review, then we'll move it along as well. So diversity chart, we will talk at the end. And references. So this is where we say, please include references from people who are not current Chinook Fund decision-making or makers or staff, just to keep it more fair for the other organizations who may not be connected to Chinook staff. Oh. Okay, so I think we're going to start with financials just because I do want to give you the most time or as much time as possible with Trina. So Trina, are you ready? Oh, yeah. Well, I'll start briefly, but this is a slight change if you've applied in the past, where you will either be required to submit the Chinook Fund financial form or your own financial forms. But if you choose to do the Chinook Fund financial form, that is the only form that you will need to submit. So take that into consideration. And then on this round, it's going to be on the Google. When you go to that question in the application, it's going to give you a link to a Google sheet. And then you will be able to download. You should not be able to edit it. Do let me know if you are able to edit it. Because you should be able to download and then save as a Excel sheet or make a copy. So if you want to make you have to upload it anyway. So I would recommend you download it as an Excel Microsoft sheet if you have that access, and then fill it out and then submit it where it tells you in the application. But you're also able to make a copy in Google Drive system and just fill that out and then download the completed form and then upload to the system. So those are extra steps, but you only have, if it's submitted and completed well, and you write in everything that's required on that form, that is the only form you'll be asked to submit, versus if you decide to do your own organizational financial forms. And Trina will go more over what those entail.
Great.
Questions?
Thanks,
or 1 second for questions before we start.
Yeah.
I do have a question in the chat, and I'm not sure who it's from, but it says 5-year business case works here. Can somebody provide clarification?
I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I'll note that. But yeah.
And
yeah, I don't see it on my.
I was just going to say, we'll be providing contact information at the end, and some of these questions may be easier to respond to via email, and you can clarify a little more what you're asking about. And so, yeah, if we're not clear and able to answer it today, we will definitely respond to email. Okay, so this is the Chinook Fund financial form. And as Alma explained, if you decide to submit this, this is the only financial form required. But if you already have your financial reports prepared from the prior year and you have a current year budget available and you can just quickly upload those, that is fine too. You can provide your own statements. Whoa, I'm watching your screen, so please don't flick around. Thank you. So yeah, this is a Google Sheet that you can, as Alma explained, should download or copy, but you can edit it as you need to. So we've put in here, like under the income section and the expenses section, we've put in some examples of different types of income and expenses. But if you, want to list different things, you can overwrite those descriptions. But basically, what this form requires, in the middle column there, you'll see last fiscal year actual totals. And given that we're in 2024, if you're on a calendar year, fiscal year, that will be for 2023. So it's the last complete fiscal year that you've completed. And then the far right column is your current fiscal year that you're in, the budget. This is a slight change from last year. We don't require you to list like how much in individual contributions, how much in grants, etc. If you want, you can just include your totals, your total income from last year, your total expenses from last year, and then your net income or loss. And then same thing with the budget, your budgeted total income, your budgeted total expenses, and the resulting net income or net loss. It helps us if you're able to complete the other lines and fill in what types of income and what types of expenses you have. But all that's required this cycle are your totals. And then underneath the income and expenses area, you'll see cash on hand. That section is also required. And so what we want to know is how much total cash did you have on hand at the end of your last fiscal year, and then also what your cash balance was with your most current month end. So if you're submitting this on the due date September 12th, and you have your August financial statements, or you have your, you know what your ending cash balance was as of August 31st, you'll enter August 31st in that yellow highlighted square that says enter date required, and you'll enter your cash balance. And then if you're on a calendar fiscal year, so you're operating, your fiscal year is January to December. In the last fiscal year end, it would be as of 12/31/23, December 31st of last year. You'll enter the ending cash balance in that very bottom square. Does anybody have any questions on how to complete the financial form? So it's just last year completed fiscal year, and then current year budget, and then your cash balances for last fiscal year and most recent month end. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, yeah. So this is what I just covered, but again, the bottom section is the cash on hand section. And for the most current month end on the right, that shouldn't be any earlier than July 31st, because we want to know, like, as current as possible what your cash balance is from last year end and most current. Okay. So if you do choose to, instead of filling out our form, you have your own financial reports and you want to submit those instead, that's totally fine. These are the three reports then that we need. So we need your balance sheet as of your prior fiscal year end. So again, if you are on a calendar fiscal year, January to December, then you should enter or submit your balance sheet as of December 31st of last year. The balance sheet is also known as the statement of financial position. The next one that we require is your income statement, which is also known as profit and loss or statement of operations. And that's also for your last completed fiscal year. So again, if you're on a calendar fiscal year, it should cover the period from January 1st through December 31st of 2023. So it should cover a full 12 months of operations. Then the third report that we need is your budget for your current fiscal year. So it would be January 1 to December 31, 2024, if you're on a calendar fiscal year. Not everybody is. Chinook Fund, we operate on a fiscal year that runs from July 1st to June 30th. So I'm just using the calendar year as an example because it's the most common fiscal year used by organizations. But obviously adjust those dates according to your own fiscal year. If you are a brand new organization and you have not completed a fiscal year yet, just on our financial form, you can just enter NA in the prior year column. Or if you're submitting your own reports, just like type on a Word document, this is our first fiscal year, and just submit that because it'll require you to attach something for the prior fiscal year, balance sheet and income statement. And you can just enter just write on the Word document, we do not have a previous fiscal year, we're brand new. And that way we know you didn't just, not submit the forms, but that you're brand new and you don't have a completed fiscal year. So you would just then need to complete the budget for the current year. And again, as Alma said, if you want to just submit our financial reports form instead of attaching those 3 reports, that's your other option. So if we do, when we're reviewing the applications for being complete, if there is a one of these reports is missing, one or more is missing, or you didn't, submit it as of for the full calendar year, full fiscal year, or the information is incomplete in any way, we will reach out to you and ask you to submit those to us. So we'll follow up. Okay, Alma, I think we can go to the next slide. So again, just recognizing that some organizations may be brand new. You may not have a bookkeeper or an accountant available. And may not be familiar with financial statements at all. So I just wanted to provide some examples just to show you what is a balance sheet. So the balance sheet, again, is also known as the statement of financial position, and it includes your assets, which is what you own, things like your checking account, or if you received notification that you are going to, be awarded a grant, but you haven't actually received those funds yet, that would be a grants receivable. If you've purchased equipment, that would be on there too. And then you'd have your liabilities, which is what you owe. So, bills that have come in that you haven't paid yet, your accounts payable. If you have staff and they are accruing vacation time, that's another example of a liability. And so then you'd have your total liabilities, and the assets minus the liabilities are your net assets, or equity. That's another word for that. So that's the difference between your assets and your liabilities. So on your balance sheet, your total assets should equal your liabilities plus your net assets. So if those 2 lines that are kind of highlighted in green there, if those don't equal each other, then your balance sheet doesn't balance. And again, this is just an example. This is not saying that everybody should have these specific assets or these specific liabilities. It's just to give you an idea of, what a balance sheet looks like. Okay, Alma. Next slide. And then for an income statement, which is also known as a profit and loss statement or a statement of operations, again, should include the full fiscal year, that most recent fiscal year that you've completed. The ending date of your previous year income statement should be the same date as your previous year's balance sheet. So if you, again, are on a calendar year, your income statement should cover January 1 through December 31, and your balance sheet should also be as of December 31. So your income statement includes your different types of income or revenue, your expenses, and then the difference between those is your net income or loss, and it's also called your change in net assets. So you can see here different types of income, individual contributions or donations, foundation grants. You might have a special event that brought in some income. You might have some interest from your savings account, and then different types of expenses, salaries and benefits, consultants, rent, etc. Again, this is just a simple sample example for you to see what's on there. All right, Alma, next slide. And then the third one is the budget. So this is an example of a budget for 2024. It reflects your plan for the current fiscal year, and it should be a realistic estimate of funding that you expect to receive, which is your income or revenue, and what you're going to spend it on, or your expenses. So one thing that is a common assumption, I think, with nonprofits is that their budget has to balance, and that's not necessarily true. I mean, we wouldn't want to see you budgeting a huge loss for the year, where your income is 100,000 and your expenses are 200,000, and you're expecting to have a net loss of 100,000. That might make us a little hesitant, or just ask. We would come back to you and ask you some questions about that. But just so you know, it doesn't have to all zero out exactly. So in this example, we're showing the allocation of both income expenses among the different areas, like program area, admin or management, and fundraising. That's not required. You don't have to include that. There are many different formats and styles of budgets. If your budget is just a total line for each of the different types of revenue and expenses, that is totally fine. Just showing you an example of a budget. But it should be, again, it should be realistic and really reflect your plan for the year. All right, Alma, next slide.
Yeah, and just to emphasize, it is 2024 budget, so this is not the budget necessarily that's going to be where the Chinook Fund is going to contribute, because you're not going to get that funding until 2025. So this is more of your current budget, because most organizations don't have their 2025 budget right now. So just keep that in mind, but there will be a question that's going to ask you, how is Chinook Fund money specifically going to be used? And we use the budget from 2024 as a guide of just how functional your organization is right now.
Thanks, Alma, for that clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, is that the end then? Okay.
Yeah,
so does oh, sorry, go ahead, Hannah.
Oh, no. Any questions? I was going to say.
I think I got some more clarification on the question that came up earlier. And it says, and I think it's about an earlier slide. It's about an NHCDC business case summary. That might work, but I might need this person to clarify for which section they're talking about. And also asked if they can send an advanced copy to check if that will work. But I do not know what that is.
I don't either.
Yeah, we might need some more information about this question. And if this could be a good email question. But if the person who asked this wants to ask now, you are welcome to. For the Excel spreadsheet, I'm not sure which Excel spreadsheet we're talking about.
The Chinook financial form. Maybe.
May I interrupt? May I interrupt?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
This is Nicholas again. We developed a 5-year business case, and it includes that information that you have there. So I wanted to know if I could use that in the summary specifically to answer your questions, which most of these are on there. So I want to know if I could send it in advance to see if that would work, or do I need to refill this out?
Are you talking about in it includes the financial information?
Yes, it's the business.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's financials.
You're welcome to email that to me, and I will be happy to take a look at it and let you know if that will work for for you to submit in place of either our form or your financial statements.
Okay, you Jamie?
I'm Trina.
Trina.
Yes. I'll put my email in the chat right now.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Trina.
Are there any other questions on the financial section?
And it does
And
help. Oh,
I was just
someone.
going to say I'm happy to um, answer questions by email, hop on a phone call with people. If you have questions about how to fill the form out, or, will this work for an income statement, that kind of thing. I'm happy to answer those questions too after the workshop. And I see a question from Erica. Can monies be used for overhead or admin from Chinook Fund? So I'll give a preliminary answer, Alma, and you can correct or change if you need to. So the majority of the grants that we award are general operating grants. So you can use those monies, how you want to use them. And as Alma said, that there is a question in the application that asks how you're going to use our money. So that's where you would respond to that. If you're applying, well, I'll just stop there, and Alma, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, there's another slide where we talk about different types of grants we award coming up. Are there any other questions related to financials or these financials that we just covered? Okay, let me go back. Let me find the slide. So if you have any, I think Trina will be here for a few more minutes, and then you can just email any of us or Trina directly. But we're kind of jumping back to the general application notes. Again, this is the general grouping of questions, and the funding questions is the second category, or funding questions is a second category, but financial form is more towards the middle. One second. Going back up to you'll be asked about milestones. So that is the example, the type of question that is going to give you a branching question. So you have to select, and it's an asterisk, so it's a required question. You'll be asked to select to add another milestone until you have 3 milestones. And we give a specific example of what those could look like. In the past, these were called goals, but many applicants were submitting like 5 goals per box, which is great. We love to see all the goals. But we want to also focus on how Chinook Fund money is specifically going to be used for. And because of the amount, it might not involve by different goals across the year. It might just be specific strategies, depending on how big your organization is. You do get 2,000 characters, but you don't have to use all of them. It does give you some flexibility on how you narrate your story, just letting you know that it's not the requirement. And then another example here is, for instance, a milestone. You can write, an example would be by July 2025, we intend to, the specific milestone could be grow our base by 50 youth. And we plan to achieve this by doing trainings on community organizing with youth, or by hosting mini block party by the school. I don't, it could be an outreach goal, for example, or it could be by July 2025, we intend to have a meeting with the mayor of your specific city or location, and we plan to do this by organizing our neighbors. So that type of example, we like to see details, and it helps the given project members see as much as possible that you can contribute, but please try to keep them in a goal type of way, for conciseness. But you do have 2,000 characters available. And then we already talked about some of the file upload. So that would be if you decide to do our financial form, or your own materials. Oh, I don't know where the English for the narrative questions went, but I'll find it, or I will tell you. So the first section is going to ask about the history. Oh, it's in English and Spanish. Okay. The first part is going to be within the narrative section. It's going to have different questions, in group of questions per category. So the first is history. And that's where you can tell us whatever you think is relevant about the history of your organization. So sometimes that includes, Siri turned on. 1 second. Okay.
It looks like you haven't set up any smart home accessories.
1 second.
You can connect accessories.
Okay. History could include key successes. So that's where you're able to talk about any history your organization has. And if you're a new organization, you can just go over how you became an organization to begin with. And then root causes, we just want to know about the root causes you're trying to solve, or you want to share with us, or how those affect your work. And then we already went over these, which are the action and lasting effect, which is criteria, constituent-led, or community-wide. So the same questions from previous slides, and we will share the slides again if you want to. We did send them out earlier, but let us know if you did not receive them. Those will have specific questions that are in the application for these 3 things. And then we have organizational structure and decision-making. So we just want to know who makes the decisions, or what is the process that goes into that. And then movement building. Again, the strongest applications have connections to other areas of work or other communities affected by social injustices.
Hey, Alma.
Yes.
Just a quick time check for you. It's about 3:25.
Thank you. 1 second. Okay. And this is just if you are a returning applicant, we did change some things to make them more relevant to what we look for, which is community-wide support or just community feedback, just how you implement those. They used to be fundraising strategies and evaluation, but we no longer ask those specific things. Those can be part of how you involve community or you receive community support. We'll go over this right now. So type of grants we offer are within the same application. You can decide to do a general operating or a project support. So general operating can be used for any cost within the charity definition that your organization needs to function if you think your entire organization falls within the Chinook Fund criteria. Then you can apply for general operating and just use the money to support the general operating. If you think your organization might not be as strong, but a specific project is very strong and fulfills the requirements, then you can decide to focus on your project and apply project support. We recommend general operating, but if you think it's just not going to be a strong application or clear the connections between constituent-led and your general organization, then you can decide to do project support. We already went over budget, fiscal year. These are the type of grants we have available. So you can apply for a startup grant, and that is $4,000 over the year, or one payment for the year, and then you will receive a grant report to submit it. These are grants for organizations that are less than 4 years old, and obviously they have a strong vision or plan for meeting Chinook Fund criteria. Or you can apply for established grant of $10,000. And that's for any group that feels that is their best chance or the application that makes more sense for them. This one is just more competitive though, because we have grantees that are over 4 years old or that are at least 3 years old that have been receiving funding from Chinook Fund. So putting them on the established category makes that category more competitive in general. But because we also have new startup grants applying, it's beginning to balance out the difficulty. So I think it's just best you apply for whichever one you feel more confident about. We already went. So you have to have a 501(c)(3) status or be fiscally sponsored by one. And if you're a worker-owned cooperative, so we have a specific definition around that, but I don't think we'll have as much time. Please check in with us and we will just make sure you're able to submit your application without the 501(c)(3) status. But usually, this is the limitations of our funding. So if you are not a 501(c)(3) or fiscally sponsored group, or a worker-owned cooperative that is not doing charity work, that one may not qualify. So you still have to use the funding for charity type of work or work that benefits the community at large, not just the worker-owned cooperative. So these are the other files you will need to upload. If you have a fiscal sponsor, you have to submit your fiscal sponsorship agreement because we're pulling up their information and their financial information. And then, yes, 10,000 is the largest grant right now. Per year. Or Sam, do you have another question about the amount?
I had thought I saw that if somebody has been gotten a grant to there's a 3-year grant available, but is that not the case?
So it depends on the given project cohort and how much funding they're able to get.
Got it.
So it still falls within the criteria. So the organizations that are considered for multi-year are usually established organizations. So those are organizations that are applied and had very strong chance of getting the $10,000. But depending on how much funding there is available, there may be funding for it to become multi-year, but those are selected under the discretion of the giving project members.
Okay.
And how much funding they have. So this spring, we were able to award multi-year funds, but those were only 2 year.
Okay.
I don't think we've done 3 years in a while. And then the last two, at least the last year before this year, there were no multi-year grants awarded just because of the limitations.
And does that do we write that on the application that we're interested in that, or it's just something that if y'all decide, hey, we have more funding, we are able to do this, or how
Yeah, because it's
okay.
so discretionary. I mean, it wouldn't harm the application, um, if you say it or not say it. It's just that we don't want to promise,
Right.
before we have the funding available. And the fundraising happens at the same time they're kind
Yeah,
of review the
the review.
applications.
Okay, thank you
It's
so
hard.
much.
Thank you for the good questions. Any other question? I'll keep going. Um, so we already went over. We won't have a 1 year work plan requirement. If you are a returning applicant, you may remember submitting that, and you won't see it this. If you're not a returning applicant, you don't need to worry about that. Oh, 1 second. You will have a leadership bio form, so you'll see that. I think that's the next thing, and a diversity chart. So the diversity chart looks like this, and let me know if you need help submitting it, or filling it out. We can certainly help you with that, because we know this may not be a common requirement of other foundations. I'm not sure. But we just want to see, because the Giving Project members may not be familiar with your work, even if staff are, it just helps them see the full picture of your organization. So this is an example. So someone would put in, from staff, someone identifies as Latina, so they will mark that. So make sure you submit. We might be able to look at the applications before the deadline, but that's also limited on our capacity. But we can help you if you have specific answers about your own application. Make sure you submit it via the grant portal, but let us know if you're having issues, and you'll be notified via email if additional information is needed. And then the deadline again is September 12th. For questions for me or just grants in general, you can email grants@chinookfund.org. Or for financial questions, you can email Trina. We are in need of Giving Project members or volunteers to help us fundraise and allocate the funds to organizations. So if you know anyone who's interested, we're still taking applicants. It is a good professional development program in general. So I did it while I was in another organization back in 2020, and it helped a lot in just my professional development as a person, but also because it has community organizing components and the training that goes into understanding what community organizing, it may also be helpful to other smaller organizations. And then the link to apply. Questions. So we have plenty of time for additional questions.